3 men fell face down on the ground. They could no longer bear to look. In front of them, a face was shining like the sun. The clothing of the man standing there had turned whiter than any fabric on earth could ever become. And he was not alone. Beside him, speaking with him, were 2 men who had been gone from this world for centuries, Moses and Elijah. Then a bright cloud wrapped around them completely. And from inside that cloud came a voice, "This is my beloved son, listen to him." This happened just 6 days after that same man had told them something they still could not accept, that he was going to die. The same eyes that saw his face full of glory that afternoon would see weeks later that same face disfigured by blows. This is the story of the Transfiguration of the Lord, and before this video ends, you're going to understand why Jesus let only 3 men see that, and why Peter, 30 years later, an old man near his own death, chose this exact scene to swear that his faith was not built on a fable. Write in the comments, "Lord, here I am." 2 words, he hears you. 6 days before climbing that mountain, Jesus had asked his disciples a question that changed the tone of everything that came after. They were near Caesarea Philippi, a city to the north, built beside a rocky hillside where one of the streams that fed the Jordan began. A place full of pagan temples carved into the rock, dedicated to gods no one remembers anymore. There, in the middle of those empty temples, Jesus asked them who people said he was. They gave him scattered answers. Some said John the Baptist, some said Elijah, some said one of the ancient prophets come back. Then he asked the question that actually mattered, "And you, who do you say I am?" Peter answered without hesitating, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." It was a high point for Peter. Jesus praised him, told him that truth hadn't come from himself, that the Father had revealed it to him. He even told him that on that faith he would build his church. But what came immediately after brought Peter down from that peak as fast as he had climbed it. Jesus began explaining that he had to go to Jerusalem, suffer greatly at the hands of the priests and the teachers of the law, be rejected, die, and rise on the 3rd day. Peter couldn't bear it. He pulled him aside and started to rebuke him. He told him that would never happen to him, that God would not allow it. Jesus' answer was harsh. He told him to get behind him, that he was thinking the way men think, not the way God thinks. Imagine how Peter felt that night. The same man who had just received the greatest praise of his life was now hearing the harshest rebuke he had ever received, and both on the same day. 6 days later, with no explanation, Jesus asked him to climb a mountain with him. He also brought Santiago and John. He didn't say why, he didn't say what he expected to find up there, he just asked them to come along. The climb was long, the ground was steep and dry with loose stones sliding underfoot. We don't know for certain which mountain it was. The oldest tradition points to Mount Tabor in Galilee, a gently rounded rise that stands alone in the middle of the plain. Some scholars, on the other hand, believe it may have been a slope of Mount Hermon, much higher, near where Peter had made his confession days before. What matters isn't the exact name of the mountain. What matters is what happened when they reached the top. Jesus stepped a little apart to pray. The 3 disciples, tired from the climb, sat down nearby. The sun was starting to go down. The silence of the mountain, that thick silence that only exists far from towns, far from the noise of markets and roads, slowly wore them down. A tired body outweighs curiosity, and the 3 of them began to fall asleep. And then, while he was praying, something changed in Jesus. His face began to shine like the sun, not like someone lit by the afternoon sun, as if the light were coming from inside, as if something that had always been there, hidden under the skin of a carpenter from Galilee, had let itself be seen for the first time with no veil over it. His clothes, the same worn tunic he had walked the whole way from the lake in, turned white, dazzling, whiter than any launderer on earth could ever make them. The 3 disciples who had been drifting off from exhaustion opened their eyes and saw something that had no explanation in any category they knew. There were no words in their vocabulary for it. They were fishermen, men who knew water, nets, weather. Nothing in their lives had prepared them for what was in front of them, and he was not alone. 2 men appeared beside him, talking with him. Moses, dead for more than 1,300 years, buried in a place no one ever knew. Elijah, taken up to heaven in a chariot of fire 9 centuries before, having never tasted death. The 2 giants of Israel's history, the one who gave the law and the one who gave the prophets their voice back when the people had forgotten God, were now standing beside Jesus, talking with him the way you talk with a close friend. Luke's gospel says something that almost never gets explained well in homilies. It says they were talking with Jesus about his departure, about what he was about to fulfill in Jerusalem. The word the original text uses is Exodus, the same word used for Israel's escape from Egypt, for that night of blood on the doorframes and a sea that split in two. Moses led the people out of slavery once with a staff and a sea. Now he was speaking with the one who was going to lead all of humanity out of a much older, much deeper slavery. And he was doing it right before Jesus began the road toward that cross. Peter, Santiago, and John were watching something no human being had ever seen with those eyes, and they had no idea what to do with it. That's when Peter spoke. "Master, it's good that we're here. Let's build 3 shelters. One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." The gospel adds a line we should read more slowly than we usually do. It says Peter didn't know what he was saying because they were terrified. Stop on that for a second. He didn't know what he was saying. It wasn't a thought-out proposal or some idea with theological weight, even though it's sometimes read that way. It was what comes out of a person when fear beats the words to the punch and they need to say something, anything, rather than stand there in silence facing what they don't understand. That feels deeply human to me. How many times have we talked too much, said something clumsy, absurd, out of place, not because we were foolish, but because fear or shock got to us before we could think? Peter built 3 shelters out of words that made no practical sense because he needed to do something with his hands shaking and his mind blank. And God did not correct him harshly. While Peter was still talking, a bright cloud covered them. Not a gray storm cloud, the kind you can see coming from far off over the lake. A luminous cloud unlike any natural cloud. The same kind that had covered Mount Sinai centuries before, when Moses received the law amid thunder, and the same kind that had filled the temple the day Solomon dedicated it. So thick the priests couldn't even stand to keep serving. And from the cloud came a voice. "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Listen to him." 3 final words that changed the whole meaning of the scene. Listen to him. Not to Moses, who had given the law, not to Elijah, who had brought faith back to a people that had knelt before idols. To him. The 3 disciples, hearing that voice, fell face down on the ground, filled with a fear the text describes as enormous, almost paralyzing. It wasn't calm awe, the kind you take in quietly. It was raw terror. The same terror a body feels when it runs into, with no warning at all, something completely beyond it. And then something happened that almost never gets told, with the tenderness it deserves. Jesus came over to them. He touched them. He told them, "Get up, don't be afraid." The same transfigured man, the one who seconds earlier had been shining like the sun in front of Moses and Elijah, knelt down beside 3 men lying on the ground, trembling, and touched them with his own hand to calm them. He didn't scold them for falling. He didn't demand they pull themselves together on their own. He touched them first and spoke after. When they finally looked up, they no longer saw Moses or Elijah. They saw only Jesus, the same as always. His clothes, ordinary again, no glow left in them. The same face they had known for 3 years. They came down the mountain in silence, and on the way, Jesus gave them a strange order. Tell no one what they had seen until the Son of Man had risen from the dead. On that same walk down, the 3 disciples asked him a question they'd been holding in. If Elijah had to come first, as the teachers of the law taught, why had they just seen him appear and disappear in a matter of minutes on top of a mountain, with no one else in town ever knowing? Jesus told them that Elijah, in a sense, had already come, and they hadn't recognized him and had done to him whatever they wanted. The gospel adds a short line, almost in passing. Then the disciples understood he was talking about John the Baptist. John the Baptist, the same man who had baptized Jesus in the Jordan, the same man who had ended up beheaded on the order of a drunken king at a birthday feast, had fulfilled, without fully knowing it, the role of the Elijah who was promised. And now, on the mountain, the real Elijah had appeared again, briefly, to speak with the one that John had only been the announcement of. The 3 of them kept turning that phrase over in their heads. The text says they argued among themselves about what rising from the dead could mean. They didn't understand it. They had just seen the greatest glory a human being can see while still alive. And even that wasn't enough for them to grasp what Jesus was telling them about his own death and resurrection. They carried that secret for months, maybe even close to a year. They didn't tell anyone, not even the other 9 disciples who were still waiting below in the village with no idea why their 3 companions had come back so quiet, with a different look in their eyes. Imagine what it's like to carry something like that, to have seen something that doesn't fit into words and to have to walk, eat, sleep, keep living an ordinary life without being able to tell anyone, learning to hold inside a secret so big you can't fully make sense of it yourself. And when they got to the foot of the mountain, ordinary life was waiting for them in the rawest way possible. A desperate father ran up to Jesus. His only son had a spirit that made him convulse, scream, throw himself into fire, throw himself into water, ever since he was a child. The other disciples, the ones who had stayed below while the three climbed the mountain, had tried to heal him and failed. A crowd had gathered around, and some teachers of the law were arguing with the disciples, probably mocking the failure. The father described to Jesus what he had been living with since his son was small. He told him, with an honesty that still hurts to read today, "If you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us." Jesus answered that everything is possible for the one who believes. And the father, in tears, said something that sums up what it means to have faith in the middle of pain better than any theology textbook could. "I believe, help my unbelief." Within minutes, Jesus went from being surrounded by light and the voice of the Father to being surrounded by screams. A boy writhing on the ground, a father crying out of helplessness, a crowd arguing. He healed the boy. He did it without ceremony, without explaining what he had just lived through on the mountaintop a few hours earlier. Later, alone with him, the disciples who had stayed below asked why they hadn't been able to cast out that spirit. Jesus told them that kind of evil only comes out through prayer, not through technique, not through repeated formulas, not through trusting their own strength. Through prayer, the same thing that had occupied him on the mountaintop, while his face began to shine. That contrast is the heart of this whole story. The glory on the mountain didn't replace the suffering in the valley. It arrived right before it, as if God knew exactly how much those three men needed to see before continuing on the road to Jerusalem, because that's what was coming. Weeks later, that same transfigured Jesus would enter Jerusalem on a donkey, surrounded by palm branches and shouting crowds. And days after that, he would hang on a cross, his face disfigured by blows, not lit up with glory but covered in blood and dust. The same three disciples who had seen his face shine like the sun would later see him hiding in a garden, sweating something like blood, arrested at night, condemned in rushed trials, killed in public, in full view of everyone. Why show them the glory before the suffering, and not after, when they might have needed it more? I think the answer is the same thing most of us need too. We can't hold on to a promise we've never seen in any form. Peter, Santiago, and John were going to need something to cling to when everything seemed lost, when they saw their teacher humiliated and powerless, when they themselves ran or denied even knowing him. And that something was this memory. We saw him shine. We heard the Father's voice. We know who he is, even when it doesn't look like it. Years later, the Apostle Peter, by then an old man, wrote about this in one of his letters. He said they hadn't followed cleverly invented fables, but had been eyewitnesses of Christ's majesty, that they had heard with their own ears that voice that came from heaven on the holy mountain. An old man who had denied Jesus 3 times the night of his arrest, who had wept bitterly over his own cowardice, still held on, decades later, to what he had seen that afternoon on the mountain. He hadn't forgotten a single detail, not the light, not the cloud, not the clumsy words he'd blurted out without thinking, not the hand that lifted him off the ground. Of the 3 witnesses that afternoon, none of them had an easy life afterward. Santiago was the first of the 12 to die, beheaded on the order of Herod Agrippa just a few years later. In Jerusalem, the same city Jesus had been walking toward when they came down the mountain. Peter ended up crucified in Rome, according to the oldest tradition, upside down, because he asked not to die the same way his teacher had. The same man who had fallen face down in fear on the mountain died, decades later, held up by the same faith he had barely begun to understand that afternoon. John was the only one who lived to old age, and in his writings, by then elderly, he left a line that many people read without connecting it to what he had lived through on that mountain. He wrote that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and that they saw his glory, glory as of the only Son of the Father. It isn't hard to picture John writing those lines much later in life, the memory still intact of that afternoon when he saw with his own eyes exactly that, the glory of God living inside a human body, for a few minutes, with no veil over it at all. 3 men, 3 completely differing endings, and one shared memory that none of the 3 ever let go of. The church began formally celebrating this event very early on in the East, and in the year 1456 in Rome, Pope Calixtus III extended the feast to the whole church, in thanksgiving for news that had just arrived those very days. The city of Belgrade had held out against a siege that had seemed impossible to survive. Ever since, every 6th of August, the church goes back to that mountain, back to that light, back to that voice. Today, on top of Tabor, there is a basilica built over the ruins of much older temples. Pilgrims climb up in small cars that take the road in tight curves because the climb on foot is still steep. The exact spot may matter less than what the tradition wanted to preserve. The memory that a group of tired men saw somewhere in that landscape. Something that had no explanation. And that's the real gift of this story for anyone listening today. It isn't just a spectacular scene from 2,000 years ago. It's proof that before God asks you to walk through a dark valley, He often lets you catch a glimpse of where the road ends. Think for a moment about your own life. About those days when everything feels uncertain. When you don't know how something you're afraid of is going to turn out. When you feel like you're walking blind toward your own Jerusalem. Do you remember a moment, however small, when you felt clearly that God was there? An answer that arrived just in time. A peace that made no logical sense in the middle of the chaos. A word from someone who held you up without knowing what you were going through. That, held onto in memory, can work the same way the memory of the mountain worked for Peter, Santiago, and John. It doesn't erase the suffering that comes later, but it reminds you who is walking with you when it comes. There's something else in this story worth looking at slowly. The voice from heaven didn't say listen to him, do whatever he says, or follow him wherever he goes. It simply said listen to him. Before asking for obedience, it asked for attention. Before demanding they walk toward Jerusalem without fully understanding, it asked them to open their ears. That's the first thing being asked of us too when we're going through something we don't understand. Not that we solve everything right away. Not that we have perfect faith from the first minute. That we listen. That we let the voice that spoke on that mountain keep speaking today, in the middle of whatever you're living through. Moses in his own time had told the people of Israel that God would raise up in the future a prophet like him, and that they would have to listen to him. It was a promise made centuries earlier, almost forgotten among so many other laws and warnings, and there on that mountain, the same voice that had spoken to Moses on Sinai spoke again, pointing to Jesus as the exact fulfillment of that ancient promise. Moses himself was there to see it come true. I'll admit there's something about this scene I still don't fully understand, and I don't think I should pretend otherwise. Why those 3 exactly? Why not all 12? Why Peter, who would fail so badly just weeks later by denying he even knew Jesus 3 times in a row, was one of the ones chosen to see something this great? I don't have a tidy answer for that, but it comforts me to think that maybe God doesn't choose the most prepared people for his greatest revelations. He chooses the ones who are going to need them later, even if they don't know it yet. And that makes me think of something else too. The light from that afternoon didn't stay permanently on Jesus' face. When they came down the mountain, he was once again the same tired man who had climbed up that morning. The glory didn't move in to stay. It was a flash. Something brief, almost as if God knew a human being can't hold that kind of sight for long without breaking apart inside. Sometimes we ask for the glory to stay, for the sense of closeness to God to last forever, for the peace we feel in a moment of prayer to never leave. But maybe it wasn't designed to stay. Maybe it was designed to hold us up on the road that comes after, not to replace it. Sometimes I wonder what I would have done in Peter's place. I'd like to say I would have handled it better, more calmly with some wise line instead of an absurd offer to build 3 shelters, but I doubt it. I suspect I would have done something just as bad, or worse, gone silent or run away, or denied what I was seeing because it was too much to process on my feet. There's something comforting in the fact that the gospel didn't hide Peter's clumsiness. It doesn't present him as a flawless hero in the face of the supernatural. It presents him as a frightened man who said something foolish and whom God all the same kept entrusting with enormous things after that afternoon. If you are watching this video today, there's a good chance it's right around the date the church celebrates this mystery or very close to it. It's no accident that this story keeps coming back year after year on the 6th of August in churches all over the world. There's something about this scene the church has considered for almost 2,000 years too important to let pass in silence. If you're going through something right now that you don't understand, something that terrifies you the way it terrified those 3 men lying on the ground, I want you to know that the same hand that touched Peter, Santiago, and John to lift them up is still reaching out today. Get up, don't be afraid. Those words weren't only for that afternoon on the mountain, before the prayer. I want to tell you something. Jesus isn't the only one in heaven listening to those who seek him. There are other intercessors who also walk with people going through moments of fear and waiting. Saint Benedict, who protects against evil. Padre Pio, who carried the wounds of Christ in his own body. Saint Joseph, patron of the family and of uncertain times. Saint Rita, the saint of impossible causes. Saint Michael the Archangel, the warrior of God. And Saint Monica, who wept for 30 years over her son's conversion and was heard. I gathered their stories, their prayers, and their spiritual teachings into a devotional guide for praying for your home, your children, and your life of faith. It's called 7 Powerful Intercessors to Protect Your Faith and Your Family. You'll find it in the pinned comment on this video. Look for it after the prayer. Let's close this time together with a prayer. If there's someone on your heart right now, someone going through a dark night, someone waiting for an answer that hasn't come, someone about to face something they're afraid of, bring them with you into this prayer. He hears. Lord Jesus, transfigured on the mountain, you who let 3 frightened men see your glory before asking them to walk with you toward the cross, look today on those who are walking without yet seeing where their road leads. There are people falling face down right now, overcome by a fear they can't explain, just like Peter, Santiago, and John that afternoon. Reach out your hand over them the way you reached it out over your disciples. Lift them up. Don't be afraid, you told them. Say it again today. Hear us. There are people carrying a secret, a burden, a weight they can't share with anyone. Just like your disciples came down the mountain keeping in silence what they had seen for months. Give them strength to carry that waiting without breaking inside. Hear us. There are people stepping into their own road to Jerusalem. A diagnosis they just received, a loss that still hurts, a decision they're afraid to make with no idea how it will end. May the memory of your face shining like the sun hold them up on the days when everything feels dark. Hear us. There are people who, like Peter, say too much when fear takes over, say things they regret later, act without thinking in front of what they don't understand. Don't correct them harshly. Cover them with your cloud the way you covered your disciples and tell them gently to get up. Hear us. There are people coming down today from their own mountain into a valley full of noise, of shouting, of problems that won't wait. May they not lose in the valley what they saw on the summit. Hear us. There are people who, like that father at the foot of the mountain, believe and doubt at the same time, hold on to their faith with shaking hands, and don't know how to explain it. Help them as you help that father to hold on to the faith they have, even if it's small. Hear us. Jesus transfigured, hear us. Amen. If you cried at some point during this video, it wasn't an accident. God doesn't waste tears. Every one of them is a prayer He gathers up. Write in the comments, Lord, I hear your voice. And if there's someone you want to pray for today, write their name too. Just that. He knows the rest. If this video touched your heart, share it with someone who needs it today. With that person going through their own valley who maybe doesn't know yet that there's a mountain of glory waiting for them further down the road. Like this video so this channel can keep bringing these stories to more families, and subscribe so you don't miss any of them. On your screen right now, another story is showing up, one that God also prepared for you. Click it. We'll see each other there.